Welcome, everyone. This is Amanda Coreishy, your host for Trouble at Taboo Junction. And today I have with me a very honored guest, Celeste Mohammed, and I am going to spend 5 minutes introducing Celeste. Celeste, don't be shy now. Um, Celeste describes her writerly mission as dispelling all myths about island life and island people. She writes less of Trinidad as an idyll and more of the everyday hardships of ordinary people created by the asymmetries of power. She is a Trinidad-based Trinidadian author. And there's a reason for that added distinction because a lot of Trinidadian authors um, live outside of the island. She's trained as a lawyer and has been writing for 10 years now, Celeste?
2012 to now.
Wow. Um, that's more than 10 years, yeah. So Celeste has under her belt two novels and stories. Ever Since We Small, published in 2025, Pleasant View, published in 2021, as well as the nonfiction work A Different Energy, Women in Caribbean Oil and Gas, published in 2023, and a children's picture book, Spree, published this year, 2026. Um, she's best known for Ever Since We Small and Pleasant View. Um, both novels and stories. Pleasant View won the 2022 OCM Bocas Prize for Caribbean Literature, as well as the 2022 CLMP Firecracker Award for Fiction. So, um, and then over the years, even before her name was so well known in Caribbean literature circles, she won the 2017 John D. Gardner Memorial Prize for short stories. And other short story prizes include the 2018 Penn Robert J. Dow Short Story Prize for Emerging Writers, the 2019 Virginia Woolf Award for Short Fiction, and this year, the Hope Prize for Fiction 2025, the 2025 Hope Prize for Fiction. So that is amazing considering that you have, as you put it, you started writing seriously in 2012. So that is wow. So Celeste is without question, and I'm sure she's quite modest, but she is without question one of the um, leading bright lights and names in Caribbean literature coming out of Trinidad and Tobago. Um, I would describe her work as vividly imagined and immersive. And now, I've only read her short stories, her novels, how you say it, her novel and stories so far, Pleasant View and Ever Since We Small. And I would describe her work as vividly imagined, deeply immersive, and full of compassion for the human condition. The worst of her characters, the most flawed of her characters, except maybe Jagroup. You can see, you can feel, you can see the goodness. There's a goodness in them. The most villainous of them, except Mr. Jagroup. So there's a lot of compassion for the human condition, and her writing is also very much characterized by a keen sensitivity to language as our most important human tool. Her work demonstrates, in my view, my humble opinion, mastery of the short story as an art form. Um, so now that I've given you that introduction, I think our listeners want to hear from you, and I'm very excited to share that we're going to be doing a couple live readings now. I'm going to ask Celeste to start by reading from Pleasant View, and I don't know what she's going to read, so it's going to be a surprise for me too.
Well, I think I decided I would read the story that I kind of enjoy reading the most from Pleasant View, which happens to be the first story,
Wow.
actually. Uh, this is the one I enjoy reading the most. Let me just find it. Right. Right. This has been my reading copy of Pleasant View for since it came out.
Wow.
So the opening story, which I called the prologue, The Dragon's Mouth or Boca del Drago. The For listeners who may not know, the Dragon's Mouth or the Bocas, as we call it in Trinidad, describes the straits between Trinidad, the island of Trinidad, and the mainland of Venezuela, which honestly we are still connected to underneath all the water. We are actually still connected to Venezuela. And because it's so close, because on on a clear day you can see Venezuela, there's a constant movement of peoples in between. There always has been. But in recent years, that has caused a bit of confusion, at least politically. So let's go. It have a benefit to being on this prison island, this tiny dot in the Gulf between Venezuela and Trinidad. Freedom. The officers don't take we on much. They don't lock up too tight because where'd have to run? We can't go nowhere, or so they feel. Straight from the cell, me and Richards, my cellmate, we stroll out. Officer Babylon watching TV. We tell him exactly where we going. Down by the water, boss, to light up a little bit. All you going and smoke, or all you going and bull? He say, squawking like a seagull. Nah, we could do that anytime we want in the cell, I say. Not because me and Richards in any bullerman thing, but because that kind of fleck up answer is the best way to block Babylon from saying something worse. Something that might make me lose my head and bossy throat. Tonight is not a fight. No, when you're head in the dragon mouth, you ease it out real slow. Me and Richards trot down the incline to the nibbling edge of the water. The place warm, warm, not a breeze blowing. But that good for us, because the water could be flat. It have a full moon though, grinning like it know what we planning, and so it come out for spite to make sure everybody see we. We didn't expect a star moon. I should have checked beforehand, my mistake. But it's do or die tonight. All the dominoes done line up and people waiting on we. So, me and Richard stand up, watching the silver water and sighing like if we's really lovers. Me ain't know what he thinking, but I studying Consuela. She dey on the other side, on the mainland. Not Venezuela, although that's where she come from. I mean the big island, Trinidad. Consuela working in one of them so-called guest house in Pleasant View. She know I come in, at least I think so. I did send message with my partner, Stench. Pack and get ready. I coming for you Thursday night. Consuela waiting. She can't wait forever. She done wait too long already. Time to move. Light the thing na by, I tell Richards, before the man gets suspicious. Richards pull a little spliff and a little lighter from his pants pocket. He take a pull, I take two. We blow out the smoke and the air start to smell like herb. I rest down the joint on a rock and prop it up nice. You ready? Yeah, let we go. With that, me and Richards walk into the sea and just keep walking till we disappear. We lucky. Not everybody could do what we doing. Only a few fellas on this prison island, even counting officers, could swim good. But Richard say he born and grow down St. Madeleine near a pond. He said nobody in the village was faster than he. But I tell him fresh water different to salt. And pond have edge, the sea ain't got none. But he say that don't matter. Me, I born in this Gulf, Icacos to be exact. If Trinidad is a boots, Icacos is the two. On a clear day, we used to see Venezuela plain as we hand. My father is a fisherman. He father was a fisherman. And so it go all the way back through history. From small, I was always on the pirogue with daddy. I learned to swim before I could walk. I learned to dive before I could read and write. That's why I slap in this water, making it splatter out of my way like it's nothing more than melt donkey. Left, right. I did tell Stench to wait by the next small island, a little cove it have there. Wait and keep the boat quiet, no engine till I reach. Bring change of clothes, I did say, and have a car waiting in Carenage. We heading straight for Pleasant View. straight for Consuela. By the time they go song the alarm on the prison island, by that time they go song the alarm on the prison island. And while they hunting for we in the northwest, we go dash down south to Icacas. I have to see my daddy and mommy again before I leave for Venezuela. I have to collect back the money daddy holding for me. With that, me and Consuela go set myself nice, nice, nice back into Copita, she hometown.
Beautiful, beautiful. There's so much I could say about that piece. Um, I remember when I first read Pleasant View. I mean, both your novels and stories begin with a story that really sets a pace. And one of the things that struck me as a writer myself is that I left Trinidad 14 years ago. And when I write about Trinidad, I am necessarily writing from memory because I don't go back very often. But what I felt very much about Pleasant View, and certainly starting with this piece, is that you were writing from a space of being immersed. You were writing about your present immersion. You're not writing Trinidad from memory, because the the presence of the South American immigrant population now, and the dynamics that have occurred, between the Trinidadian population and Venezuelan population over time, it's a whole different story now compared to 14 years ago. you know.
Yes. Yes.
Um, and the other thing I love about the story and all your stories is you have very, very clever titles. So here
Mhm.
we have the dragon mouth, right? But when you stop to think about it, this is a dragon mouth. There are layers of meaning there. This is Consuela going into the mouth of the dragon, innocent, innocent, feeling she going to for betterment to make her life better. And she's being trafficked. She's being trafficked to be a sex worker. And the boy who like her don't even know. He's the bait. Well,
Yeah.
Um, and then later on, she's in the well, they call it a guest house where she does her sex work, and she's now hoping again for salvation. She's hoping that, her boy coming to save her son will come in to save her. And the beautiful thing is it's a love story too, and it's a tragedy. It's like Romeo and Juliet because
Yes.
the boy loved the woman and he
Yeah.
wanted to save her, you know.
Yeah.
And into the dragon's mouth again. He
Hmm.
gets shot, she gets recaptured. You know, it it's a beautiful story, and it's so well done.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, yeah. So well done. You you pack every single word in your stories. It carries its weight. It does work.
Yes.
I don't know how much work it takes to get a story to that point. Because the stories aren't thin either. It's not like, well, this is the story. It's as if you put as much as could fit into that story without it being too much. So
Yes.
it works.
Yeah.
It works. It works. And whether you read it quickly or you read it slowly, and whether you pick up all the little layers, you get a lot out of it. So
Yes.
yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I mean,
Um,
the thing for me is I don't believe that I don't believe in subs. I went to school, to writing school I did my MFA in the US, but there is such a thing as the American short story. It's probably a lot leaner. It's
mm,
probably a lot more measured. It's a different animal altogether. But I believe that a West Indian short story, certainly a Trinidadian short story, I believe in writing that. And that is a story. If you know how Trinidadians actually tell story, it's a very animated, very colorful story. Lots of synonyms and metaphors and onomatopoeia and all of those.
yeah.
That's how we tell stories.
Hmm.
So for me, it's about taking a Creole, not just Creole as in the language, but taking a Creole approach to storytelling and I suppose elevating it into fine art. That's what it is.
And you do it so brilliantly. You do it so brilliantly. And I think it's inspiring for other writers to see what you can do and how you can do it.
Mm.
And it's in the tradition of Earl Lovelace as well. And I think it was Earl
Mm.
Lovelace's work was probably the first work to my recollection where I witnessed that confident, unapologetic use of our language and basically saying, this is how I want to tell this story. And if you don't want to read it,
That's
that's
okay.
fine.
Yeah.
But primarily I'm writing for home.
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah. So would you like to read from Ever Since We Small Now?
I thought you'd want to space it out and probably do that a little later on. Do you want to do it that way or because give
I
them something to look forward to?
okay, we could do that. We could very much do that. We could very much do that. So I would say your work is also very deeply rooted in place. And I feel as if you couldn't transplant these stories easily into another place without necessarily losing some of their magic and some of their essence, you
Yes.
know. And so like all good stories, the themes are universal
Hmm.
for the reader. You know, sometimes you're writing about misogyny, sometimes you're writing about patriarchy, you're writing about love, you're writing about, you know, men who have feelings and as they and they don't step into their feelings a lot of the time. They step away from their feelings and they lash out, you know. So in your writings, a lot of universality in the themes, but the actual way it's written is very much rooted in place. Um, yeah, so this question wasn't meant to come up so early, but I'm going to ask it anyway. I've recognized that for, Ever Since We're Small now has is going to be published on the African continent.
Yes.
And I think I've heard you say in another interview that at one point you were saying to yourself, well, if the way it is, it's possible that people outside Trinidad aren't going to be able to get these stories. You know, so
Yes.
what's been your journey there from writing
Mm.
the story and knowing you were writing for your Caribbean audience, but wondering how it, you know, how far the story could go and have you been surprised by the reception, you know, well outside of the Caribbean space?
Right. So a few things there. One is that ever since we're small, could also be unintelligible by people within the Caribbean
Hmm.
because ever since we're small focuses on a subculture of Caribbean culture, a subculture of even Trinidad culture, and that is the Indo-Caribbean or Indo-Trinidadian experience, which typically, when it has been portrayed, it has been men writing about it, and when it is women, uh, hardly ever is it women who still reside here.
Hmm.
Women who have perhaps gone to Canada or somewhere else are now writing in a sort of retrospective kind of way, looking back. And there are reasons for that that are cultural. So even the language in Ever Since We Small was a big deal for me to try to remember how my family, my Indo-Trinidadian family that I would have lived with when I was small, um, trying to remember how they sounded and how they spoke Creole because what you would typically find in Trinidad in West Indian literature is you would find instances of the Trinidad Creole, but it would usually be an urban black Creole.
Mhm.
It's much more rare to see the Southern Indo-Trinidadian Creole on the page in such volume.
Yes.
So we're talking about a subculture of Trinidad culture. And outside of that subculture, much of what is in Ever Since We Small may not have been, I was aware that it would may not have been understood by even other Trinidadians.
Hmm. Interesting. Interesting.
Or, yeah, or other Caribbean islands. So for a Jamaican, say, reading Ever Since We Small, I expected it would be a challenge. And from what I understand, a lot of people have said, yeah, it was a challenge.
All right.
Because,
Okay.
yeah, you're talking about their knowledge of Indian culture is a lot different. Um, so having said all of that, I also understood that people from, let's say, the US or UK or whatever, outside, further outside the
Yes.
culture, may not have gotten it. What has surprised me is that last month, I think it was June, um, a book club in Africa, a sort of Pan-African, West, not maybe not Pan-African, but certainly members from different parts of West Africa. A book club there was reading Ever Since We Small, and they invited me. When they told me they were reading it, when the person who runs the book club told me they were reading it, I was like, oh, okay, well, let's see how this turns out. And then when they invited me to the book club discussion, I went in just, you know. And when they started to talk and ask me questions and give their feedback, I was totally shocked because they they understood they understood the book in many layers and like things like some of the folkloric elements like the buck and this and that they completely understood. It didn't even bother them at all. They were like, yeah, we get it because it's the same thing here.
Yes. Yes. So there's a universality that you discovered through your readers. A
In
lesson
terms
level.
of,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
on the level of folklore, of course.
Right.
I mean, and yes, loosely, I did know that some of the folklore characters that we have in Trinidad would have come from Africa or whatever. But to see them just be like, what's the, yeah, we get it. We understood everything. It was so refreshing, right? When there are people within Trinidad, there are people within the Caribbean there are people in this hemisphere who will tell me, no, we didn't get it. So you can't
Interesting.
pick it. You can't pick where recognition is going to come and not come.
And it's also wonderful that you didn't limit yourself to worrying about making sure that this is, you wrote it how you wanted to write it, how you
Yeah.
felt the story needed to be told.
Mm.
And
Mm-hmm.
you didn't like limit yourself by worrying about the audience. Um,
Oh.
and I would say from discussing with, other friends who'd also read the books, that many of us were learning little things too. I was learning
Yeah.
things about Jose that I didn't know.
Yeah.
Because all the years I lived in Trinidad, probably how many years? At least 30 years, over 30 years I lived in Trinidad. I had never been to Jose. I went to
Right.
Jose as an adult, as a visitor, after I'd come to settle in the UK. So there are things I was learning about Jose. And there were Trinidadians in the group who'd never heard of a buck, you know.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
we were learning too.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you know, that is also one of the rules of fiction.
It is.
If humanity has a long-term history, fiction is part of the historical record in its own way.
Yes.
Yeah.
I agree. I agree.
Um, yes. So I want to move on now to sharing with you my response to the first chapter of Ever Since We Small when
Mm-hmm.
I read that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, sometimes they say you can read the first page of a book or the first few pages and know that you're in the safe hands of a
Mm-hmm.
competent
Yes.
storyteller. Well, yes, there was definitely that feeling. But there was another level at which I felt you were telling my story and my
Mm.
ancestors' story. And I'll tell you why.
Mm.
Um, like yourself, I have ancestry from India. But
Hmm.
unlike yourself, I grew up with the Afro side of my family, and I never
Mm.
knew the Indian side. Now, the
Ah,
Indian side are not via Trinidad, they're via the UK.
right.
But I'm aware that my ancestors were people like Jayanti. You know, they may have been Muslim for a certain number of generations, but Islam is a relatively new religion. They might very well have been Hindus too. Who knows if some of them had to face that sati as well.
Yeah.
And I felt almost as if you were speaking, you're so not just speaking on behalf of Indian women, but almost as if you were speaking on behalf of all women. I don't
Yeah.
know why. I had that, so I started to feel very strongly about that book just from that first chapter. And
Hmm.
before I got through the second chapter, I was like reaching out to people. Have you all read this book? Do you all want to talk about this?
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So, but going further on that chapter, um, and going further as I started to read, a picture started to emerge, and I was telling myself, is Celeste doing this on purpose or is this by chance? Because I was seeing an emerging pattern. I was seeing you writing about Sati, you're writing about the book, you're writing about racial separatism, racial stereotyping, um, colorism, child marriage, murder, suicide, domestic violence. And I was asking myself, but it looks like we're touching on all the negative stereotypes about the Indo-Trinidadian community. And I
Hmm.
said to myself, well, I don't know if this is intentional or not intentional, but I know I could never write a book like that.
Hmm.
Because if someone who is not rooted in the Indian community were to write Indo-Trinidadian community, were to write such a book, they will be accused of racism. Now, the truth is, some of these stereotypes are not limited to the Indian community. You have intimate partner violence, you have all these things, all groups of people. Um, but then there's some that are more peculiar to the Indian community. And what we know is that every community has stories that they tell about themselves. Like in the UK, some people's story is my grandfather was a miner, or, my grandfather served in the war. And then in Trinidad, we have our stories. The Chinese community have their stories, the Syrian community have their stories, the African community has their stories, and the Indian community has their stories. And the prominent, dominant Indian community story is that we came here as indentured laborers, we worked hard, we sought our education, we saved our money, and this is the progress that we've made as a community, and it's a wonderful story. It is a true story, and the inter-community loyalty is a good thing. But there are things that the Indian community doesn't like to talk about. And when you wrote this story, was there a part of you that wanted to self-censor? Was there a part of you that was worried about how it might be received?
I knew very well the story I wanted to tell because I am not, it took me a while to get to the point in my life where I realized that being mixed race, more or less 50-50, 50% Indian for sure, and then the other part being mixed. Um, and being an insider, outsider, being in a thing but not of it was a
Hmm.
privilege. And it gave me the right. When I just started writing this book, I did consider, should I be writing this?
Hmm.
Because I am not an Indian woman. Should I be saying these things? And then after sitting with it for a while, I realized, you know what? There is no other story I can tell because I didn't grow up in any other community. This is my story. Whether or not I am racially pure, I do not have another story to tell because this is it. I grew up in a matriarchal Indo-Caribbean home with my grandmother and all of her daughters and their husbands and their children all growing up in one yard, very much like Mr. Tulsi, the Tulsi household in A House for Mr. Biswas. That is what I know. So I have a right to write the truth and to write what goes on in the community, the things that aren't spoken about, the things that are just taken as normative. I have a right to say those things and to put that out there as much as anybody. And I actually, once I came to that decision, I realized, you know what? I'm prepared for whatever will come.
Hmm.
I want somebody to stand up and tell me that I should not have written these things. I would love
Nobody has,
it.
but nobody has.
Nobody has.
Good.
Nobody has. But
Yes.
because they cannot, because I am not lying.
Hmm.
I planned for it by putting a list of main sources in the back of the book. So anything I say,
Interesting.
you can go and read the academic backing for why I've said what I've said. There is a list of main sources in the back of the book. I also planned for it by reaching out to Lisa Outa, who is a feminist, Indo-Caribbean feminist scholar, and an independent scholar at that. Um, and the editor of the Journal of West Indian Literature. And I said, Lisa, would you write the foreword for the book? And she said, well, I don't know, send it to me. When she read it, she said, absolutely. And so the foreword that is in the book was written by Lisa. So I've bookended the actual story with academic expertise that supports what I've written. You may not like how I've written it, but I haven't lied about anything. And in fact, I've drawn very heavily on stories within my own family. You know,
Wow.
a couple
Yeah.
stories I have repurposed and changed names and sort of things. So, um, I don't feel at all inclined to write to make anybody happy by writing what they think is the view of the Caribbean, or to write the propaganda about what we should be writing. For me, I think the literature of a people belongs to the people, and literature is the space in which you, as a people, wrestle with the
Right.
things that you are not happy with.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
So this is me wrestling with things that I am not happy with, have never been happy with. And that is my right. And yeah,
I'm sure there were people who didn't like what Dickens had to say about London
yeah,
back in
yeah.
those days. He was writing it as he was seeing it. Um, the other question that follows very nicely from what you've said is that would you describe your works as feminist works? Because you are writing a lot about patriarchal structures.
Mm,
And, even though I'd say Ever Since We Small is primarily about generational trauma and healing, a lot of
mm.
that generational trauma is rooted in the male-female dynamics, the unhealthy elements of male-female dynamics.
Yeah. Well, as I've said before, I detest labels. They make me
Right.
itch. So I would
Okay.
never describe myself as a feminist or any kind of ist, simply because I believe those are very narrow containers.
Hmm.
And I never know when someone says feminist, what they mean by it, because it means different things
Aha.
depending on who's saying it.
This is true. This is very true.
So
It's
I
very
would
true.
never describe myself as feminist because I don't know what that means. I would say that I have a deep concern for women and women's issues. And yeah, that's how I would say it. I didn't sit down and say, I am going to write a feminist book. I sat down and I said, I'm going to write a book that tells the truth about what it's like for some women, particularly the woman in my family. Um, and that's all I'm going to do. I'm going to be honest about it.
Interesting. And I think that's very fair. Um, because the work is, it's a big volume here. You've got 300 pages there, you have 200 pages there. So the work can stand for itself. And people can people will interpret it as they interpret it. Some people may call it feminist, that's their choice. But you wouldn't want to limit your work by putting labels on it that, as you say, may have connotations that you didn't intend. And,
Yeah,
and I get
exactly.
that. I get that.
Yeah.
Now, I would describe your work as very potent,
Mm.
um, in a good way. I'd say there's a potency to your work. And my question is, would you say that the work emerges and then you find yourself saying, ah, that's what this book is trying to do? Or do you start off with a conscious mission and motivation?
Well, it was different. Each of the book, well, Pleasant View and Ever Since We're Small, if we're talking about those,
Yes.
they came to be in different ways. Um, Pleasant View was first when in its first iteration, it was six stories. The six stories that I had cobbled together during my time doing the MFA program in Boston. I had to hand in a thesis. I had all these stories in various stages of disrepair. So I sat down and said, okay, what is this thesis going to be? And when I started rereading the stories I had written over those 2 years, 2.5 years, I realized, hang on, um, there is a kind of theme here. And I could make that theme more pronounced if I put all of these people in one town and
Hmm.
connected them in that way. Because then I would be able to show a sort of microcosm, a typical Trinidad town, right? And I said, okay, well, let me try it. So I did, and I had my different color markers and whatever, and I plotted out how I was going to arrange. But the stories had not been written as a book. They had been just what I was handing in at school. But then I sat with them, rearranged, tweaked some things, and came up with the six stories that was Pleasant View. And then after I graduated, in the years afterwards, about 3 years afterwards, I wrote three more stories to make that six nine, which is the nine you have now.
Right.
But I was able to write those three because I stood back. I could stand back now, having connected the six, and look at it and say, okay, there's a gap here, there's a gap here. This, and I wrote the three. Um, Ever since we're small, slightly different trajectory. What had happened? Pleasant View came out into the world, was having great success. And I had a moment of panic as like, oh, I literally don't have anything else. I've never written anything else, and what is the next book going to be, right? So that was there in the back of my mind. And then during COVID, I had to keep myself sane. I used to come into my office every day and just write a little bit, a little whatever. And I had come up with a story, and it was not a very good story, to be honest. It was terrible, and I couldn't seem to fix it. Um, and I said, you know what? Who is it in this story that I actually identify with? Okay, well, I identify with the mother. So let me try to figure out where I could go with this by trying to get to know the mother. And so I started writing this aimless thing that was just going on and on and on. It was just me trying to get to know the mother in that terrible story. And I'm writing about her background, I'm writing about her childhood, and it's aimless. Then someone came to me and said, oh, we love Pleasant View. Do you have any other short stories? We would like to include one in an anthology. And I said, yeah, sure, yeah, no problem. But this time I didn't have anything, right? So I go back to the aimless thing I was writing, and I found a section that I felt I could shape into a story. I plucked it out, I shaped it. Great. Then someone else comes to me and says, hey, we love Pleasant View. We'd like to include a story of yours, any new work you have in an anthology. I'm like, yeah, sure. I go back, I go back and I find another little section and I shape that up into a story. And in the course of writing that, a second story bubbled up at the same time. So now that meant three stories. The first thing, the first really bad thing, then the short story I had pulled out, then these two. So that's four stories. And at that point is when I stopped and I said, okay, we have four stories involving connected characters because they had all come out of this same thing. This is half of a book. Let me now sit down and plot where I'm going to take this book next. And that's what I did. I sat down and I plotted what the rest of the book would be like. Um, and it was at that point 8 stories. And then by another circuitous method, it ended up being 10. But the
Now I'm
bulk,
really,
yeah.
I'm curious, like which you described a story that was really bad. Which did that story make it into?
Yes,
Which
it
which
did.
which which of the stories started off being really bad? Tell
The
us.
one about Anand, what is it called? Goat mouth.
Oh, oh, really?
That was the first one ever written. That was the
Yes,
one written during COVID. That was just
but
unfixable.
but it's a very strong story,
Well, it
as
ended
it
up,
is right
yeah,
now.
yeah,
Yeah,
as it is right
yeah,
now. But for some time, I just could not fix it.
yeah, yeah. You probably needed to know more.
Yeah, yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
yes, yes. Um, yeah. So that's definitely interesting, and there bound to be some story writers listening to this, maybe at the present, maybe in the future. How long would you say it takes you to complete a story? And I feel that's an unfair question to ask someone who just said that it's not a sort of linear process.
Yeah, no, it isn't linear.
Yeah.
I think it has to do with inspiration.
Hmm.
Sometimes, like the story I read earlier from Pleasant View, that story took me about 2 weeks to write, but writing a first draft of a story is not the end of it. It
Right.
of course it would have taken a couple months of back and forth with my editor to polish it to a place where I was like, okay, yes, I like it now.
Right.
Um, and then after that, when the book is actually compiled, I might have made further tweaks. So, but if I'm really inspired by what's in my head, it could take me 2, 3 weeks to write a story end to end if I'm writing every day.
Right. Yes. And your typical stories, they're what, 10,000 words? They're not short.
Um,
Seven, ten
mm,
thousand words.
no, I would say typically I write around 65 to 7,500 words.
Right. Yeah. So on the
There,
longer side of the short story.
yeah, the
Yes.
longer side. There
Yes.
are times when, like for the Hope Prize thing, Commonwealth Prize thing, I would do 4,000 words because that's the word limit.
Hmm.
But it is actually hard for me to write a short.
Yeah.
I have written before things that are like 2,500 words and whatever, but it is hard because I do tend to be like a little bit longer.
Yeah.
65, 75.
And I
Yeah.
would want to guess that's because you like the complexity. You don't
Yeah.
want it to be too simple. You want to give people a lot to chew on. And they're different styles, and I think we all write from a place inside ourselves. You know.
Hmm.
So a little bit more on the short story. How would you say, especially for writers out there, how would you say a short story differs from a novel? It's not just, on the surface, it sounds like a stupid question because obviously a short story is short, but but how would you answer that?
Well, practically speaking, if you have a career as a writer, you do have options. You could spend, a novel is a job that you spend years doing. You spend years writing a novel. Um, and a short story is a different thing. We just talked about being able to finish a short story in weeks or months.
Yes.
And I felt, um, as a mother, I had my daughter while I was at doing my MFA and whatever. As a mother, as a busy parent, with everything that's happening and living in the times in which we're living, every day I see and I hear at least 3 things come up against 3 issues or so that pique my attention and make me think like, huh, I would love to write about that. But am I going to spend 10 years, 5 years, 6 years writing a novel which is invested in a few characters and covering a certain thing, certain few things?
Yeah.
Or am I going to take the opportunity where I could write a short story with different characters, focusing on different issues? Because that's what a short story brings, focus.
Right.
If you want someone to pay attention to something, a short story is a great way to ask somebody to zero in on a particular topic, locale, whatever issue. And for me, that is the advantage of a short story. And I will always write them because, like the Hope Prize thing, something came across my mind. I was paying attention to certain things, listening to a conversation that I wasn't involved in, eavesdropping. And I said, you know what? I'm going to write a story about it.
Interesting. So in short, the short answer is that you have too much to say to confine yourself to a novel.
No, the short answer is there's too much going on in contemporary Trinidad life for me to delay. It's too urgent.
Yes,
Current contemporary Trinidad life is too complicated and too urgent for me to take the luxury of not writing short stories.
interesting, interesting. Um, and how does the novel and stories, which you have written through Pleasant
Hmm.
View and Ever Since You're Small, how does that differ from a novel
Well, I mean,
structurally?
structurally, well, yeah. I mean, I take the stories, the individual stories, which are meant to stand alone, and if I arrange them in a certain order. And if you read them in the order in which I presented it, you not only feel you have two levels of satisfaction, or you should. One of having read a short story, but also there's a larger arc. So you feel as if you've read a novel. Um, that's what a novel in stories is. Now, a novel itself, the chapters don't stand alone.
No, they
In a
don't. They don't
novel
make sense on
itself,
their own.
they
Exactly.
don't stand
Yeah.
alone. And it's kind of there's room in a novel for lag time, and there's room for a whole set of, these machinations. Whereas in a novel in stories, as I said, each story is very pointed, but arranged in such a way to meet a larger arc. And I also felt in Pleasant View, okay, I did it. Ever since we're small, I felt I wanted to push myself and see what are the limits of this form, this novel
Hmm.
in stories form. How how much can I do with this form? Can I write an epic? Can I start a book in 1899 and end it in 2017?
Which is what you did.
And so I
Yeah.
feel satisfied that I have gone up to the limits of the form and lived to tell of it.
Now, I have a theory about Ever Since We're Small, which I haven't had time to test. So this is an invitation to anyone listening, um, to read Ever Since We're Small and then reread it again, taking it apart structurally as if you were looking at the structure of a novel. Because a lot of writers might be familiar with this book called something about swinging a cat. What's it called again? Um, but it's about story structure. I'll put
Hmm.
I'll put the name of the book in the show notes. Um, why is it you can't remember something exactly when you want to remember it? Um, anyway, it's something about a cat. It will be in the show notes, but it shows you like the 16 parts that characterize a novel. Um, and I felt that I could see the shape of a novel through Ever Since We're Small. As when you get to the 50% mark of
Mark.
Ever Since We're
Mm.
Small, where we are at feels like a turning point, a major turning point, and it feels like the point at which we go from exploring the generational trauma to beginning to explore the healing. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
so that's a little clue as to why I started to feel and that it could be classified as a novel, not just a novel in stories. Um,
Mhm.
and then you
Well,
have
my publishers didn't want to call it a novel in stories.
hmm,
They
interesting,
wanted to call it a novel.
interesting.
And there was a lot of debate, and so different people seeing it as a novel, different people saying, no, it's not even a novel, it's just a bunch of stories hinged together.
Hmm.
For me, it's a novel in stories. That was what I was trying to do.
Yes, 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 yes. And I mean, I suppose it's up to the readers to debate how they want to classify it.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. But that's my challenge to anyone who wants to take it up.
Right.
See
Yeah.
if it follows the beats of those 16. See
Beats.
if you can find the 16-part novel structure in Ever Since We're Small.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Would you be willing to read for us now from Ever Since We
Sure. Sure.
Thank you.
Okay. And again, I will read from the story I enjoy reading from the most.
Good choice.
And it's the titular story, Ever Since We're Small,
Okay.
which is set in 1987 in Barrackpore Village, Trinidad. That August holidays, after a year of matchmaking commerce in the family, Pa did send me and Salma by Mammy's sister, Tanti Nazrun, for she to learn we about business and thing, just in case nobody ever ask again for we to married. Nazrun shop was 2 streets away. We used to walk from home every day. But we didn't notice early o'clock. Tanti couldn't do maths to save she life. And we did wonder how she managed to stay in business so long and what she could have ever teach we. And we did feel sorry too bad for she. So we did bring a little calculator from home for she to use. But she said she didn't trust them small, small number that keep appearing and disappearing by themselves. That's how old people was in them days. You couldn't argue with them. You had was to swallow whatever they tell you. Otherwise, was cuss in your tail, or worse yet, 2 cookie a broom on your back. That's why we did take a good long while before we interrupt Tanti and the young handsome stranger man who did waltz in the shop on that rainy Tuesday morning, trying to pay with $100 bill. We did spend a good few minutes watching one another back and forth, talking with we eyebrow, until we decide that it's Salma who should choke herself in the big people conversation. Like how she did smarter in schoolwork, even though she did only 13 years and I was done 15. We know Tanti would accept she mats quicker than mines. You see, I was always the black sheep of the Mohammed family. Why? All because I did look scary when I born. Tar color skin, with long hair, long nails, and 2 newborn teeth. Mommy said the midwife did tell she I would be a greedy child who would have caused plenty grief. And she and Pa used to pong that talk in me and Salma head ever since we did small. One of we had blight, and one of we had barakat. Sometimes, I just feel things might have turned out better for we. If only did they tell we something different about we-self.
It's a very moving, it's a very moving story. It's a very moving story. Um, and one of the things I recall too when we did a little book club um, meeting around your book is that people had different favorites.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, among the stories, among the
Yes, among the
characters. Yeah.
stories. Yeah, among the
Yeah.
stories, definitely.
Yeah.
Among the stories. Um, One of the things I haven't mentioned yet in this conversation, and it's one of the things that excited me most about Ever Since We're Small, is how you, in every single story, included a spiritual element
Yeah.
and you reinterpreted that to suit yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the gospel according to Boise
Mm-hmm.
and you sort of rewrote the introduction to Genesis.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you gave the Hindu goddesses their own character.
Mm-hmm.
And you made the Baka character we could kind of sympathize with. He wasn't just
Mm-hmm.
some kind of little demonic
Mm-hmm.
character. And then, even in this story, Ever Since We're Small, we see the power of what I call bad mind.
Mm-hmm.
Because Yasmin feels jealousy and anger towards Salma and Sunil, not Sunil, Salma and Shiva after they get married.
Shiva. Yeah.
She holds that and she prays to God for bad things to happen to them. And then
Yes.
when bad things happen to them, she carries that guilt, you know.
Yes. Yeah.
And what did that happen? Was this something that you went back and wove into some of those stories so that you would have that consistent thread, or did that just emerge?
No, it was deliberate. I went and I did research on bought books and so on Indo-Caribbean folkloric me- characters because again, whenever you see, I detest the term magical realism, right?
Hmm.
Because I know it is associated with Marquez and whatever, but the truth is, if you ask any Trinidadian, my parents' age, my grandparents' age, about magical realism, is this a magical realistic character? They would not know what you're talking about because it's just reality. There is no magical realism. For them, this is real. The
Hmm.
Sukunyua is real. The buck is real. The all of these things, realities are sliding, is a spectrum here. It's a sliding scale. And in Trinidad, with regularity, we just go from one side of the veil to the other. It's just all reality, right? And so I wrote just the same way that we live and have conversations in Trinidad. I wrote every story
Hmm.
just the same way we would. The buck would be okay. Um, the description I just read of uh, Yasmin describing herself when she was small. I didn't call, I didn't use the name of the character, but that corresponds to a particular Indo-Caribbean folkloric character, a certain type of child that will, there's a name for it, begin with R, I can't remember. But I deliberately did that because I wanted to show just how fluid reality is in Trinidad. So in every story, there's that fluidity. Also, you don't see Indo-Caribbean folkloric characters in typically in West Indian literature. You may see a buck, but that is not Indo-Trinidadian. That's just generally. But some of the other things like the churail and this other character, the child I was talking about, some of the other little elements there, you won't see it in literature. And I said, well, why not? Why not put them in there and um yeah.
I felt, and this is something I enjoyed about what you did, and I don't know how deliberate it was again, but through the various spiritual characters like Siparia Mai, um, who is like a Black Madonna. She's many things to many people. I believe the Hindus, the
Mhm.
Hindus, the Catholics, and others venerate her in different ways. Um, but I felt what you did with these spiritual elements, for the most part, with the exception of Godfrey the Buck,
Yeah.
was these were spiritual elements which perform the role of religion and spirituality in giving people light, giving people salvation, giving people help. And of course, the irony is we know that a lot of the harm that is occurring in these people's lives is also enabled by religion
Yeah.
and patriarchal
Hmm.
views, you know. So
Yeah.
it was a beautiful reminder of the duality of that.
Yeah. And always in all my books, you will always see me questioning the role of religion and the religious person, the religious man, the religious woman, the ultra religiousness. You will always see
Mm,
me questioning that. As
mm.
far as the book is concerned, I took a different approach to the book for a deliberate reason as well. Because in Guyana, so when I grew up hearing about the Buck was the little man from Guyana, like a leprechaun who could make you rich, whatever, right?
Yeah.
But in Guyana, I'm not sure if you know, but Buck is sort of like a racial term, an ethnic slur, which has been reclaimed by some. So, there was Kuli, which meant in Indian, and it has been reclaimed by some, I'm Kuli or whatever. And Bok is a term for the group of people belonging to the Waro tribe, the First Peoples tribe, who were very short, had those indigenous features, um, and because of where they lived on the Delta, they looked as if they could walk, like if they had magical powers to be able to walk on water or whatever. Their feet were different, everything. And yeah, they were oppressed and they were all these things, and the word buck became like a racial slur referring to them. Some of them have reclaimed it. Some people are will very proudly say that. And that's what the story, people take that story lightly, but that's what it's about. Where again, it's about immigration, forced or otherwise. The buck is captured and brought to Trinidad and kept in a cage in a rich man's office because of the Trinidadian fetish for certain things and the idea that this will make them rich. And he has been longing to go back, and he finds a way through this boy to try to get a way to go back. And he talks about, I haven't always been in a cage like this. I used to be a man among other men my size. I used
Mhm,
to,
mhm.
all of those things. I think everybody misses that, um, and just takes the buck on the level of what it means in Trinidad. But that story is actually a deep story. And I think it's also a story. The trees play a big part in that story. These trees are
Yes,
telling that
yes, as
story.
the narrators, yeah.
Also, for the same reason. When you think about Trinidad as an island, when you break away from the mainland and you become an island, things get trapped here. Species get trapped here. And they have to evolve. They have to adapt. The trees are the only ones who have witnessed all that adaptation.
Yes, yes,
When slaves came from Africa, when indentured came from China
yeah.
and wherever, whatever, everybody, you can't leave an island. You have to adapt. So all of those things were built into that story. Um, and I like this story. There are people who absolutely detest it. There are people who love
Really?
it.
Oh my
Yeah,
God. Yeah,
there. Each of the stories, you have people who are very strongly for
yes.
or against. The one of the publishers who was considering the book had wanted me to completely cut the first story,
No.
Gianty.
Really?
Yeah. Uh,
No.
and he had said he had wanted me to completely cut that one, and he had said the second story, Outsiders,
Uh-huh.
um, about the book. He had said it was a terrible book story. There are much better book
Oh,
stories, but he didn't get it.
right.
He just didn't get it. He didn't
Yeah.
get what I was trying to do.
It's so layered in so many different ways that I'm glad that you kept those stories. So these particular publishers, did you end up going with that in the
No,
end?
no, I
Okay.
was like, okay,
No.
thanks very much for your
Okay.
interest. Bye.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Because without, you see, the story of the outsiders, where Sheba meets this buck, is a way of explaining everything else that happened. And
Yes.
one of the things that I felt is that if you had taken all the spirituality out of the book, the stories would have still worked
Hmm.
because we things happen to us without us ascribing spiritual forces to the things that happen to us. However, the the ability of the readers and the reader and the characters themselves to ascribe spiritual meaning, spiritual causes, spiritual salvation, it it takes a book to another level. I think it would have been some of the soul of the book is in the presence of these spiritual characters, to me, to me.
Absolutely.
I want
Absolutely.
to invite our listeners now at this point to um, offer any questions they might have. In the meantime, Celeste, is there anything, just we can just chat until the questions arise.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I appreciate you having read it so in depth. and and seeing some of those layers. And my goal is always I want people to go back and read the book. I want people to live in the book the first time around. I want people to come out of the book and think about the characters. I want the book to pull you back so you read it a second time. And when you read it a second time, I want you to notice things that you didn't notice before. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, yeah. I can guarantee you that happened to me because I read Ever Since We Small more recently. I read Pleasant View back, I think, in maybe 2023. And I wanted to come back to it in preparation to speaking with you. And I had forgotten how excellent these stories were. And I
mm,
felt that I was appreciating them on another level this
right.
time around. This time around. Like I think the first time I read the last story, the one where Jason
Yeah.
meets
Kings of
Omari
the
and
Earth.
he,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't think I fully appreciated it, you
hmm
know, but I
hmm
think I got more out of it this time.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, the
And
first time, I think the first time a reader reads the book, they're reading for plot more than anything else.
right, yes, yes, yes. You want to know what's going to happen next. Yeah, and the second time you already know what's going to happen next, so you notice the little things, the little things. And there's a repeated theme that we see with so many of the male characters, and this is going back to Pleasant View now. Um, there's a character called um, Declan, whose
Yeah.
wife has suffered multiple miscarriages, and this is something that ends up wrecking their marriage. And then later on, we come across Jason, beginning to resent his mother, for the way in which she seems to be taking out her anger at his father on him. And repeatedly what you see with a lot of the male characters is the desire for is the male character is feeling strong emotion and they do not know how to turn that strong emotion into something constructive.
Yeah.
And they lash out or they move away and they end up creating more of a rip in the relationship. And you see it with the female characters too. So you're not saying that this is only something that's not only a male problem.
Mhm.
All right. So I think we may have a question from Linnell of Afro Reads. She says, "Hi, I haven't been here for the entire interview, but um I do love Celeste's responses about instead of writing a novel, she took the opportunity to write a short story collection that blends so well. But I would love to know how her family immigrated to Trinidad." Interesting.
Right. Yeah. Well, on my father's side, of course, we I only recently, it's very interesting on both sides. Let me give you the easy part. So my mother is Indian. Her so my her father's parents came from India. They were some very, very, very light-skinned kind of Punjabi people who would have come from the north of India. Um, the her mother's parents, they had been born here, but they never learned to speak English. They were born onto an estate, a cocoa estate, sort of in the central area of Trinidad. Their parents would have come from India. They were born here, but they, as I said, never really learned to speak English. Um, I'm told my great grandmother only knew one English word.
Hmm.
She knew how to spell one English word,
Wow.
WOOD, wood, because wood is what they needed for everything, right? They had to go and collect firewood every day and that sort of thing. So that's on my mother's side. On my father's side, it gets a bit more interesting in that I recently found out the whole story. I always used to look at my grandmother, my father's mother, and wonder why she looked so different. Like he's dark, he's a tall, dark. I would look at him and just think he's a tall, dark black man, right? And but his mother didn't look like that. She looked different. Her hair was not very dissimilar to mine, long and wavy and whatever, very kind of light skin, and her features, everything was kind of different. But I didn't know. When I asked him, he said, "Oh, because my grandmother is Carib." But in Trinidad, when they say you're Carib, it's because they don't really know what you are. It's just kind of a catch-all for anything that they don't know, right? So yeah, what I found out recently was that there was some war or something, and a bunch of people, like French Creole people, had to leave Grenada because they had participated on the wrong side of the war. And they fled Grenada and came to Trinidad. They were given land or acquired land in the north of Trinidad. And there was a whole lot of children. This particular, it was the Salandis. There were a whole lot of children, and two of the daughters fell out with the rest of the family. And they took their money and their inheritance, whatever, and went as far as they could go, all the way down to the south of the island and settled there, bought up their land and stuff there. And they began to, well, they intermarried and had children with local men in that area. Two sisters living side by side, having kids or whatever down there in that area called Maruga. And my father is from that line. So the reason why his mother looked the way she looked was because she was French Creole and black and whatever mixed up. She wasn't. And then on his father's side, um, his grandmother was Scottish Irish, McGilvery, a
Yeah.
white, so it was like typical Trinidadian where so many things mixed up inside of you. And yeah, that's how it was. So my parents met. He was from the deep south of the island, Moruga. My mother was born and bred in San Fernando, which is like the southern city. And his 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 mother was a farmer, and she used to come to the market in San Fernando to sell her produce. And after a while, she was able to build a small house in San Fernando in what they would have termed the town. And she moved the family to the town, and he enrolled in the same school that my mother was going to, and that's how they met.
Thank you for that, Celeste. We have a couple more questions. We have one from Yolanda. Yolanda says that you've mentioned you don't like labels because they're too limiting. And you've rejected the label feminist. So she's curious about how you would classify your body of work.
I've never given any thought to how I would classify it.
Okay.
Again, for the same reason
Yeah. Okay.
of,
So other than novel and stories, you've classified
Mhm.
under that label, novel and story.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would say West Indian literature, Caribbean literature. I have never given any thought to how I would classify it beyond that because I feel whatever labels that might be implied would probably be too limiting for what it is.
And there's a subjectivity to how readers would perhaps put a label on your work. So you'll find that different readers would label it differently. Like I have
Hmm.
a tendency to want to look for, what is the core thread. So when I look
Hmm.
at Pleasant View, where I would say what you seem to be doing to me and through Pleasant View is looking at Trinidad and Tobago society and holding up a mirror and saying, this is who we are. Because in every single story, besides the people and their interpersonal goals and experiences and conflicts, you are picking on something in particular. You're picking on, not picking on, but exposing or exploring sex trafficking, police corruption, the pressure of migration due to economic circumstances and how that destroys families. You've picked you every single story picks up on something different. Our ecocide, if you want to call it that, our relationship to the leatherback turtle. You have people trying to protect it, you have people trying to eat it. um,
Yes.
you know, homophobia. In Pleasant, whereas in Ever Since We're Small, it seems as if you're looking at I would say generational trauma, and you would say specifically with elements in the Indo-Trinidadian community. I would say with Pleasant View, it's more like looking at Trinidad and Tobago as a whole. Yeah.
Yeah. But in both cases, it is a curiosity about community.
Hmm.
whether that community is, uh, as I said, a family or a cultural, a subgroup, an ethnicity, whether we're looking at that as the community or whether in the case of Pleasantview, you're looking at a town which is meant to be an example, a microcosm of Trinidad as a whole. So, and that is why it lends itself so well to the novel in stories form, where in every chapter you could look at a different person in
I
the
have,
community.
I have a suspicion that you've inspired more novels and stories through your
Yes.
work, getting your work out there. So Suzanne asks us, is there a trade-off between writing a meticulously researched story and one where you are writing from your lived experience, perhaps with more creative license? And what is the correct balance?
That's a good question. Um, I think it depends on the story and it depends on what the story is about. I think in some cases, as we discussed earlier, I could have just written from my lived experience and that is it. But because I felt that what I was writing, even if I wrote from my own experience, would be a bit controversial,
Hmm.
or there would be people who would rush to say, no, 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 no. That might have been your narrow experience, but you can't, don't go and act as if it is a wider thing. I felt I needed to do the meticulous research, you know, and to put it out there and whatever. So I think if I wasn't writing something that was so controversial in some ways, I don't know if I would have needed to do as much research. Some of the stories in Pleasant View, I didn't do any research for. I just knew of situations very close to me or whatever, where I knew from the inside what had gone on and I just wrote it. So, for example, in Pleasant View, there's 6 months.
Uh-huh.
I knew of a situation very similar, and I just wrote from what I knew and filled in the rest with my own creative. I didn't research anything.
Yeah.
Um, but I was not writing about something that could be so explosive or, as I said, controversial. So I didn't feel the need to have to go down and research and that sort of thing. And the thing about researcher, sometimes it helps, but sometimes knowing too much
Hmm.
weighs on you. Like it clutters you and you feel constrained by what you know the facts are. So it all really depends on the nature of the story you're writing and whether or not you could expect anyone to be offended by it.
Yeah.
Or yeah.
Because in a sense, what you wrote in Pleasant View, it was almost like you were right. You were exploring things that nobody, everything is an open secret. Abortion is
Yeah.
not legal, but we know that if you have the money, you can pay
Hmm.
to get it done. That's
Right.
that's an open secret.
Yeah.
That there's police corruption. That's an open secret.
Yeah.
You know. Um, ah, so now we have another question from Yolanda. Um, Okay, she says that the answer you gave was the answer she guessed would be your answer. Now I heard you say you have a curiosity about community. It may sound silly. Do you have a preference for specific voice from within these communities? D-
Yeah, I don't know what you mean by specific voice, but um, I don't think I have a preference for a specific voice. I think being a lawyer is a spent. Yeah, I'm still a lawyer. I can still practice. I still do practice now and then. But being a lawyer, I think one of the things that I got from that is the ability to switch sides
Hmm.
and to sort of put myself, whether or not I personally have experienced a thing or whether or not I personally agree or disagree, the ability to put myself in someone else's shoes and advocate for that person's position. So there have been times when I write a story from a female perspective of the victim. And then there are other times when I'm like, no, I actually want to write this from the perspective of the man because I want to know, I want to understand why a man in his position would act like that. I want to understand, there's that Blake poem, Tiger, Tiger, Burning Bright. What immortal hand or eye have, has framed you, what it is that has made you who you are. And for that, I can't answer that or I can't explore that from an outside perspective. So I have to write from the perspective of the offender or from the perspective of the man or whatever. Um, so I will write from whichever voice I feel is the one most likely to give me the truth about why this situation happened or why this person acted in this way.
Yeah. And Yolanda, I don't know if you've read um oh, I can't really. We're not really having a free-flowing conversation here. But one of the things you find is that not only she says the truth. I love that.
Hmm.
She loves that what you're going for is the voice that tells the truth. Um, One of the things you find is that she's trying okay, the villain isn't purely a villain. Like Lal is a wife beater, he's dishonest. Um, but then we have a chance to see him as a child in his innocence, you know. Um, Shiva again, he's abusive, but then we also have a chance to see his heart and that there's a part of him that doesn't want to be this bad man that he's become, you know.
Hmm.
So yeah, there's a lot of that. There's a lot of beautiful exploration of the human condition with a lot of compassion. Um,
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think we're sort of approaching the point of wrapping up. So if there are any more burning questions, please raise your hand or put them in the chat. And in the meantime, I'm going to ask a slightly dangerous question. And I have
Sure.
another one. So if you don't want to answer this one, we can go to the safe one. So here's a dangerous question. If you had the means or the magic or the power, besides your writing, because that's a kind of magical power by itself, right? What are the three things you would do to transform Trinidad in a positive way?
Hmm. Well, one of the things I would do is being done right now in some countries. I would ban social media for all children under a certain age.
Interesting.
I would do that
Right,
because I don't think it is healthy at all what we see happening. So yes, I would ban social media. That's one of the things I would do.
right.
Another thing I would do, I suppose, is if there were a way for me to retire all existing politicians, just retire, please, just retire and make way for new, fresh blood to come in. I would do that. I'd probably do that because politics is half of the problem in this country.
Hmm.
Politics is half of the issue. As bad as Trinidad is at its worst, at its absolute worst during election season.
Hmm.
And that is the time I sign off of social media completely. I don't even want to be on social media because I really don't want to see what y'all actually think. It's too ugly.
Yeah, yeah. Have you got a third or?
Thinking about the third.
Yeah,
Um, I suppose it would have to do with the environment and rethinking the way we treat the environment, our complete lack of any kind of effort being put into recycling or like, we just disrespect the environment. It's just become like that's how it is. That's how we are. And I would love to try to find a way to roll that back and just
hmm.
change the attitude to the way we live on this island.
And in your book, Ever Since We're Small, I feel
Mhm.
that the way you wrote about the trees, it positions the trees as living beings and creatures to be respected.
Yeah.
So I think you've infused a little of that into your work. Now, I really want to end on a positive note.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask you um, what advice you would have for people who are new to the short story writing craft specifically, and also especially people who cannot pick themselves up and go do an MFA, because
Hmm.
that's true for a lot of us. We don't have the time,
Hmm.
or we don't have the money, or we don't have either. So where can short story writers start?
Well, writing is a craft. You learn by doing. And so any kinds of courses that you could do, writing courses, good ones, take it. I've started hosting a lot of those and teaching a lot of those in the Caribbean, Guyana, and Trinidad because I think it's necessary. Also, read a lot of short stories. Read a lot of short stories and try to read like a writer, like the writer that you want to be. Try to read and sort of make notes, not just read for plot, as we said, but go back and really ask yourself why you're enjoying this story or not enjoying this story. And that's valuable information for yourself as a writer. So yeah, reading like a writer. I would also love to see more people be open-minded about the stories that they read, come to the story with a more open mind, um, and not with something in your head about how the Caribbean should look, or how Africa should look, or how X or Y or Z should look. And I feel that is a lot of that happens these days
From the reader point of view, you're
from the
saying.
reader point of view.
Interesting. Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I would like to say in closing, and I'm not trying to flatter you, Celeste. I've said this to other people. I have said that I think that for someone coming to the craft of short story writing, studying your stories could be one of the things they do.
Yeah.
Now, hopefully they wouldn't feel intimidated, but there's plenty there to
Mm,
examine.
yeah.
So I think your I would recommend that people could do that.
Well,
Um,
thank you. That
yeah,
is very
because
nice. That's
because
very kind
the
of
stories are
you.
excellent. Yeah, but I'm saying it to your face, but I have said it before. I've said it before. I've said it before. Well, thank you, everyone. It has been a lovely afternoon,
Yes,
evening,
thank you
morning,
for
wherever
having
you are.
me and thank you for everyone who has come on.
It was my pleasure. So I will now say good evening and thank you very much. And looking forward perhaps to maybe a future conversation after your next book. Thank you so much, Celeste, and thank you everyone for coming.
Okay, bye-bye.